This is your Pain Game podcast, where we talk about the game of living in and with chronic pain and trauma, getting to the heart of how to heal. I am your host, Lyndsay Sopranlo. On this show, I plan on discussing with doctors, chronic pain patients, holistic practitioners, loved ones, and anybody that is interested in having their voice heard in the chronic pain and trauma world that we live in. So I am scrolling through the 5 trillion options that we have to watch television, right? To watch on TV. And I have a pretty broad palette, I would say. I love my stand-up comedy and my true crime and rom-com. And I certainly love my Game of Thrones and Schitt's Creek. But, when it comes to documentaries, I am fairly picky because I think that we need to be picky when we watch things that are quote unquote said documentaries, because the truth is hard to see in our world these days, and it's slathered with marketing. And unfortunately, a lot of it is false and misleading. So as I'm scrolling through Netflix a few months ago, I stumbled upon a documentary from 2018 called The Bleeding Edge. It's about the medical device industry, the FDA, mostly about women's bodies and how we are horribly treated, our health, doctors, their families, and also a little bit about some lies. And the lies and deceit are part of the reason that our nation is so fucking sick. We are ill, guys. We are ill. And we're old. We are getting older. And everyone has 30 things to complain about with their bods, everyone's talking about their ailments. And, we know this pain game so well now that we're just used to talking about it. Like, oh, what's going on with your bod? What's going on with your bod? Well, remember when you were a kid and you would have to go over to your grandparents' house? I wasn't a huge fan of going over there because all they were doing was talking about their ailments and the weather. It was the most boring thing ever. But they were in their 70s and 80s, guys. And we're talking like this in our mid 40s and down. And I can say mid 40s because I complain about my body because I'm in my mid 40s. But I hear more young people complaining about their health issues than anyone I know over 65. And I hear from that demographic on the daily with my sweetie. So whose fault is this? I mean, I suppose it's everyone's fault but our own, right? The pointing the finger game. But we need to stop being treated like everyone and be true to ourselves, because every body is different. Everybody, each body, right? We can't be treated all of the same in regards to our health and our well-being. We just can't. We have to make more educated decisions about our healthcare and not rely on doctors, because what we're finding is that they don't know shit. And I'm getting pissed off and more pissed off by the day. I mean, at least that's how it feels to me. So anyway, so in this documentary, it's about a bunch of women who are standing up for their bodies, their relationships, their children, their jobs, and their place in this world. But it is also about some men who do work hard to protect our rights and do work hard to protect our bods. And, one of them is here today for us. And there are some men who do work hard for us, right? And they work hard and sleep on the floor of their offices, only getting an hour a day of sleep just to work on behalf of our well-being. And one of my goals is to bring more men into this conversation because there are wonderful men out there that are fighting for us. And the one that's here with me today, he is an advocate for us, ladies, and he's not too shabby to look at either. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you my guest today, Adam Slater. Thanks for being here today with me, Adam.
Hi, Lyndsay. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful to have you on. We're going to talk a little bit today about the FDA, about doctors, litigation, and the stress that litigation does put on the chronic pain patient, which oddly enough furthers their conditions, right, in the negative. He is a nationally and internationally acclaimed certified civil trial lawyer and a partner in the New Jersey trial law firm Lyndsay Slater, Katz and Freeman. He has over 25 years of experience representing the victims of negligence and wrongful conduct. Many of his clients have suffered chronic pain from their injuries, and he has obtained hundreds of millions of dollars in verdicts and settlements for his clients, including the victims of dangerous medical devices and pharmaceuticals, general product liability, medical malpractice, automobile accidents, and the list goes on and on. He has been featured and interviewed by media all around the world and was in said Netflix documentary, The Bleeding Edge, which is where I found him. So I wanted to nab him up. That's a lot, dude. So let's do this thing. I'd like to start with you talking about real quick about how you got into the litigation for victims of these dangerous medical devices, because that really was at the heart of how I found you from the documentary.
Thanks, Lyndsay. I'm trying to figure out all those nice things you said about someone. I'm trying to figure out how that's me, but thank you.
It's you.
I got into medical device litigation sort of by accident. I was a plaintiff trial lawyer, mostly doing medical malpractice and all types of personal injury cases. You name it, car accidents, truck accidents, whatever the case may be. And I had a case referred to me one day as a medical malpractice case, sent it to a really good expert to look at, because when you get a case sent to you, you have to have an expert tell you if it's a real case or not. And my expert came back to me and said, I don't think there's malpractice here, but you should look at this mesh stuff that they were putting into this woman's vagina. And I said, wow, that's interesting. I don't know what this is. And I did a little research. One thing led to another. And I started to get more clients. And I started to figure out, hey, there's something here. And I found that there were women on the internet who were talking to each other, trying to find answers. And ultimately, I found my way to some really good experts who were really committed and really objective and fair and cared about actual patients and not just about placating medical device manufacturers. And I got some really good advice. And before you knew it, I had a bunch of these pelvic mesh cases, primarily against Johnson & Johnson and its subsidiary Ethicon. And I was off to the races. And that was 2007. And I'm still doing that today. I'm preparing for a trial in May right now on a pelvic mesh device against Johnson & Johnson.
That's just nuts. And, it's because when you hear the word mesh, you actually don't think of something that would really harm you. And then this documentary talks so much about it as well. How, it's permanent and it shrinks and like bombards your organs and it scars into place and it's not coming out, And it's just unbelievable to me. And the massive amount, its goal was to actually cause inflammation. Hello. Every day of my life, I'm trying to do things that don't cause me inflammation. How many cases have you had? Approximately, we don't need to, specifically by number, but approximately how many have you been working on in relation to this?
Since 2007, I've represented roughly 400 to 500 women.
Whoa.
And amazingly enough, that is not a big number compared to some other law firms all over the country too. I've had the opportunity to go try cases in Missouri, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and a few others in New Jersey here where I'm based.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that and for representing those that are out there that have dealt with the mesh side of it. But you also have worked with other medical devices and companies. We both were so upset about doctors, right? And I think we should start there because it's really where this all began, between medical device manufacturers and the doctors. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you really feel about these things? How you really feel about it?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right, Lyndsay, that doctors is the right place to start because doctors are the gateway that the medical device manufacturers, and I'm going to talk about medical device manufacturers. The pharmaceutical industry does the same thing for the most part, but we'll talk medical devices. Medical device manufacturers use doctors, and I am not choosing my words lightly. They use doctors as their gateway and as their chief marketing conduit. What do I mean by that? I'm going to pull some phrases out of documents that I've seen from these mesh manufacturers and other manufacturers over the years because I've gotten to know the culture in these companies, and there's certain language that repeats across the marketing departments in these companies and the sales departments. So what they do is they target doctors. And I even have a PowerPoint from Johnson & Johnson that I use in my trials where they were teaching sales reps to target the doctors who will generate sales. So first of all, the companies know I've got to get the doctors on board because they're the ones who are going to recommend these things to their patients. And we know most patients go in to see a doctor and the doctor says, this is what you need. And most patients are going to say, you're the doctor, okay. And maybe later we can talk a little about what you said in the beginning, which was great about advocate for yourself and don't just trust the doctor. But that's the first step. Now, in a vacuum, I say, well, that's fine because doctors go to medical school and they read whatever they read and they're really smart. So they know what to use and what not to use. I will say this as a generalization. There's a lot of doctors I'm very friendly with who don't fall into this category, but unfortunately, there's many, many that fit the following profile. They are sheep. They are looking to be led around. They go to national meetings in San Juan, Puerto Rico, or Phoenix, Arizona, or wherever it is, and they write it off and they have a nice vacation, and they go to some meetings and some conferences where doctors who look real good, speak real well, who are being funded by the medical device manufacturers, give these really fancy presentations about these great new technologies and why these technologies will revolutionize their practice. It'll be great for their patients. They give them fudged data. And what they also do, by the way, is let them know we have a whole department in our company to teach you how to get reimbursed 100% by the insurance companies, which ICD codes to put in, et cetera. And wow, where before you have to operate on this condition, it would take you 4 hours and you could do one a day. Well, now you can do them in 20 minutes a piece and you could knock out 8 in a day and you can get paid more for those than you did for the surgery without it. And these doctors' eyes open wide and they say, wow, this sounds great. I heard it at a meeting, so it must be true. And then on top of it, the sales representatives, we all know what they are. We all know what they do. We see them around doctors' offices. They go and they kiss the doctors' asses. They give them lunch. They take them to dinner. They invite them to a meeting in Florida. They act real nice to them. They act like they're God. And it's not real hard to buy a lot of doctors off. $5,000 and some ass kissing will get some doctors loyalty for life. And I'm saying this because I've seen it happen so many times. And so there's the gateway. The companies know that the way to go is through the doctors. They get the doctors on board. How do they do that? They market with other doctors who tell them, I'm just like you. I'm just smarter and more experienced. Do like I do. And boom, that's how these medical devices take off.
You guys can't see me, but I'm just sitting here shaking my head. And I also feel like I want to barf a little bit because I had that. And there are a lot of people that I know that have had medical devices implanted. I was one of them. I had a spinal cord stimulator go south on me. The trial was even bad, but man, oh man, did those reps made sure I got that fucking thing put in my spine. They made sure of it. And hindsight, looking back at it, they forged such a good, tight relationship with me, an intimate relationship with the patient. The sales reps were. And it was unbelievable. As you're talking, I'm like, dude, we were like talking outside of my body. We were just like shooting the shit. Like, how was your weekend? Like we turned into friends and somebody that I could trust. And bam, sure as shit. As soon as that thing went south, the doctor, the reps, the people that were part of it, silence. Absolutely no word from them. And my sweetie's an attorney as well, not within yours, within surrogacy, but he was just screaming at one of the reps that he finally got on the phone about we had to find a way to get this taken out because I was out of state and no doctors would touch it. It's just nuts.
I'll tell you what's really interesting, and it's a lot of it has to do with email. We now get access to things that 20 years ago nobody saw. And that's why, honestly, the litigation has changed. And I think the public's appreciation for the problems with the pharma and medical device industry has increased is because of emails. Now, what do I mean by that? I often tell juries, I'm going to show you evidence and prove my case, not with what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to use all their own documents, the defendant. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the emails where the medical directors and the salespeople and the marketing people are writing to each other and talking about what's really going on. And specific to the sales reps, you should see these emails because their division manager is telling them, hey, you can get your numbers up and you can win this bonus and you can do this because it's all about how many you sell. And the pressure on these sales representatives is immense. So they're being pushed internally. And you look at these emails and you see how they're talking about the doctors. I've shown some of these doctors. Did you know that you were being targeted because they thought that you were the pathway to another 150,000 in sales through the hospital you worked at? Did you know that's why they were talking to you? Do you know they were talking about you like a commodity? And some of the doctors look at that and they're say, wow, that's not good. And some of them probably figured it out already because they're happy they're being taken out to dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
But we get the truth in these cases. We get to see what's really, really going on. It's interesting. And, we were talking about the doctors before. I want to just tell you the flip side to it. As I said, not all doctors are like this.
Sure.
What happens when a doctor speaks out. I know some of those doctors. They get attacked. They get attacked by their medical societies because the people who are in the highest positions in these medical societies, who make the decisions, write the platforms, decide what direction they're going to go in, with very few exceptions, they're all being paid by the medical device companies. So they're already on the payroll and they're in a high level position, like with the pelvic mesh that we're talking about here. Some of the major professional societies, the American Urogynecologic Society, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Urologic Society or Association, they put out statements saying these pelvic mesh cases are the standard of care and the gold standard treatment. And they put all this stuff out. But then when we deposed these doctors, who were these high-level presidents and these people on these commissions, we got their emails and we saw them saying, this will be really good for people to use defending litigation. It's right there in the emails. So these societies that are supposed to be there for patients, that's supposed to be number one. First, do no harm. Patient safety comes first. You find out when you get the internal documents that these societies, which are, by the way, funded by the medical device manufacturers and the pharma companies who pay for these big meetings once a year in Phoenix or wherever, they donate massive amounts of money. They have booths. They take everyone out to dinner. They literally have people on the inside who are setting policy to help them in the litigation from their failed products. So it's a very, very corrupt process. And these societies should be ashamed of themselves. They should not be allowed to take any money from these companies. They shouldn't be allowed to have anybody in a position of authority who is beholden to them because of money. But, who am I to say?
I mean, I just have my thought or two on this topic.
Just one or two.
Just a couple. I'm just, it's not like you don't know that kind of stuff goes on, like gross corporate, but just to hear it about our bodies just makes me want to explode. I'm so disappointed in our healthcare system in America. I can't speak to other countries because I don't live there and I don't know enough about it. But I'm just tired of going to see doctor after doctor after doctor and they're not talking to each other. And half of the shit that they've given me has been so bad for me and has caused all kinds of other problems. Is it malpractice? Probably. Do I have a case? Probably. Do I want to go through the stress for it? No.
Well, we can talk about that in a few minutes about what it's like and how the process is stacked against the victim. And I'll tell you, just the last thing, it's interesting, again, with the emails. There was one very principled doctor in the pelvic mesh arena who actually has worked with me as an expert witness. And she wrote for one of these major societies a practice bulletin about pelvic mesh when it first was hitting the market and said, the punchline, the key part was these devices should be deemed experimental until there's really long-term data that proves that their benefit outweighs the risk. Sounds pretty reasonable. So what happened? The medical device companies went crazy because insurance companies don't pay for experimental treatments. So then what they did is they worked, and I'm quoting from emails, behind the scenes through their consultants to get the word experimental removed. So from February 2007, when it went in September 2007, they did all their behind the scenes work and they reissued the bulletin and took out the word experimental. What is the email from the J&J marketing director to their consulting doctor who took credit for getting that word removed? I love you, man. I'm doing the happy dance in all capital letters. And that's from the marketing head. And it's unbelievable because I can't even imagine how many thousands and thousands of women now suffer with chronic pain with these horrible devices because this ACOG, it was actually, this medical society, decided to accede to this pressure from the medical device industry and remove that one word.
Wow. That's just, it's so manipulative and just, it's so gross. I mean, I'm kind of speechless for everybody that knows me. That's hard to do.
I come at this as a cynic and I'm not surprised by anything that I see like this. It's just, this is how they do business. And you would hope that at some point somebody would take a principled stand at one of these companies and that it would catch on, but that might not maximize profits. So
Forget about it.
You see companies talking about marketing to less skilled doctors because they want to open up their market share, even though people in the company are saying less skilled doctors are going to cause more complications with a complicated device. Doesn't matter. You have doctors who are clearly not qualified to do something doing it. How do I know that? Because that's what the internal documents show the company was being told by the doctors working with them, saying, we really shouldn't be putting this in the hands of doctors that aren't the really high level skilled doctors. And the company doesn't want to hear that because the marketing people want to move up and they want to get to be in a really high level position in the company. You do that by generating profits.
Yeah, and I don't know how these people put their heads on their pillows at night. I mean, I am too much of an empath. I care far too much about people. That's why I'm here with you right now. It's why I started the show in the first place. Is I needed a spot. I needed a place that we could talk openly and honestly and vulnerable about this shit that's happening to us and our bodies. And I've got friends that are in cases right now for spinal cord stimulators and for some other things. And it's just been going on and on and on. And it's making them all more sick. And so you had mentioned about like the stress that litigation causes people that live in chronic pain. I mean, stress in general is bad for chronic pain. I can't even imagine having to do like and have to relive stories over and over again and have to say the same thing over and over again and have to do it in front of doctors and having people call you liars and that it's all in your head and you're making it up and all of that. We get that, especially as women. Women are treated so differently by doctors than men are. And it's really, really sad. And I don't necessarily know why. Is it because we probably should just go back to not being able to vote?
You know what? It's an amazing thing because when I found that out as I started to handle these cases, because I was representing more and more women and the focus was on gynecologic care, urogynecologic care. I've said vagina as many times as most gynecologists over the last 15 years. Because that's a part of your body and that's what gets violated by these products, these pelvic mesh devices. So that's how it is. And I learned as I went along from more and more of these, and by the way, really brave women. And I'm going to talk more about why people shouldn't be scared of the litigation process and some of the heroic women I've represented and seen what you really can do if you just put your mind to it and you just ignore what society's going to think about you and the stupid taboos. But I started to learn more and more that women are treated differently than men in medical care. And I never really would have understood it or believed it until one after another explained to me. And I looked at the medical records where I would call up a client and say, your medical record says you had no complaints that day and that everything is fine. And the woman would say to me, my client would say, what are you talking about? I explained that I can't have sex without pain. I explained that I have mesh coming through my vaginal wall. I explained that I can't control my urine. I explained that I'm having all these problems and the record is acting as if everything is fine. And I would say, well, what did they tell you? Well, the doctor told me that I should just try to do X, Y, Z. And a lot of it's in my head and I should calm down and get more sleep and don't drink as much coffee. And I realized, and these are slight examples, it became very extreme in a lot of these cases where it was very clear that, and this is not, by the way, just male doctors treating women this way. It's female doctors also, maybe even more so. Maybe even more so than male doctors, which has been very surprising to me because I think that in some cases a female doctor might say, I have the same issues. It's not that big a deal, which is really, really judgmental. And it's nice to say I'm okay. And so you must be okay too. But there's no doubt men are treated in a different way. They're asked more questions. They're asked, what do you want to do? What do you think? I don't think that women are asked that very much. I think that they're told this is what we need to do. I mean, you look at so many different procedures that have been out there over the years. You look at all the different things that gynecologists are pushing on women to do, ablations and cutting away tissue and doing this and doing that. And all these are is money-making procedures in a lot of cases that aren't really needed, but they just push them on women. And if you're not a doctor and you have some sort of an issue where your doctor tells you do, it's scary to say, well, you know what, I'm not going to believe you. But what you said made so much sense. You don't have to say yes that day.
Right.
Unless there's an emergency, you're in the emergency room, you need surgery to save your life. These are not life-threatening situations. So you can say, thank you. You can say, can you give me some studies that actually studied this? Can you tell me where to look to educate myself? What are my alternatives? Can you give me some information about those? And I would say this, if your doctor is too busy, too impatient to answer those questions, then that's probably not the doctor for you. The only exception I'd give to that is if you're going to a doctor who is literally at the top of their field and they only have a few minutes for their patients and they're just there and you say, I need this doctor because this is the one to do this for me. If it's not some sort of a very serious, life-threatening or immediate need, take your time. Find another doctor. Get a second opinion. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I know we're busy, but this is your body. This is your life. And it takes a lot to do that, to say, I'm going to wait. But then, my gosh, how rewarding is it if you go to someone else and say, wow, someone actually answered my question?
Yeah, someone I've actually cared about why this might be happening. Like we've talked about on this show and will continue to, is that trauma-informed approach to care is like the center of everything that I would like to talk about, because a lot of these women, who knows what is going on with their bodies from something that's happening in their marriage, in a relationship, whatever it might be, any traumas that might be from when they were little girls that pop up unexpectedly triggered by something that can cause all kinds of things for our body to go haywire. And instead of our doctors going, "Hey, let's get you connected with a really good nutritionist. Let's get let's come up with some other things that might work for you, and then let's circle back to this potential idea for you down the road if things haven't improved." We're not getting that. We're not. It's this is it. Take your pamphlet. I'll see you. I'll see you in surgery. I mean, there's very little love and nurturing that comes from it. And you're talking about women that are in pain, and they call us hysterical, right? Like hysterectomy. We are hysterically upset. We're pissed off because you guys are using our bodies like a wasteland, man. You know, like we are not your guinea pigs. It's one thing if we sign up and we know we're doing a clinical trial. We know that these things could happen to you. If you go in with your eyes wide open or wide shut, whatever movie you like there, depending upon how you see them view the world and how you're going to be in, if you already know those things, then, sorry.
How about or being told this hasn't been studied yet. It's being studied on you and some other people. We have no long-term data, so we don't know what's going to happen to you. How about being honest about that? That was what I talked about before about these products should be experimental. That doctor has said at trial and has written and published her opinion on this, that patients, based on her opinion, as she published it for a major society, it was in there for 9 months until it got pulled out because of money. She made very clear that you need to counsel the patients that they are having an experimental device put in their body because there is no long-term data on a permanent implant. And I was really amazed when I would take the depositions of these representatives of these companies and say, well, why didn't you do the study? Why didn't you do a 3 or 5 year study? Why didn't you get some long-term data? Why didn't you get, and you know what the answer from someone was? The industry was moving so fast and the technology was moving so fast from one to the other. By the time we would have finished the study, that device would have been obsolete. And I look at these people like, so you're telling me you knew this would only be potentially used for a couple of years? Did you tell your patient that? Did you tell? No, of course not. Or did you tell the doctors that? Of course not. So the doctors couldn't tell their patients. If something is going to be obsolete in a couple of years, maybe we need to wait a little bit. Maybe we need to be a little more conservative.
Yeah, exactly. Take our time. They're trying to rush all of these devices to market. And it's like, do we even need some of them? Right? Like, are we just like dreaming up stuff?
By the way, rush to market, that's a phrase you find in the internal documents of these companies. Literally,
oh, I bet.
That's speed to market.
Yep.
Is a marketing strategy. And I'm taking that from internal documents at companies when I say that to you. Speed to market is a requirement in a lot of these cases. And in a lot of these cases, I had one where the company said after the fact, we committed the quote unquote cardinal sin. We went to market without data, but they did it. If you look at the emails beforehand, people were pushing and saying, hey, this other company's already there.
Yeah.
If we got
to speed up right now.
Yeah, if we don't get doctors to adopt our product up front, they'll never, ever come to us, or it's going to take years and we're going to lose market share to this company. And that's the counterintuitive part that we as patients don't really think about, is the devices and the drugs that we're being given are the product of marketing competition. And there's alternatives. And it just means that our doctor decided to have lunch with this sales rep rather than that sales rep, or went to this presentation instead of that one quite often. And I'll tell you, part of the problem is medicine right now is the vast wasteland of paperwork. Mm-hmm. And we know that it's hard to get people to want to go into medicine now. The smartest, the best, and the brightest have been going on to Wall Street or going into finance for years because they don't have to go to school for 12 years, et cetera. So I think that there needs to be some serious reforms to the medical profession and the medical industry. That's not for today, to take some of the time pressure off doctors so they can actually think and be doctors instead of paper pushers. So the system overall is broken. But who pays the price? Patients.
Yeah. Me. and so many others, and I mean, there were so many parts of that documentary that just make my skin crawl. One was about the FDA grandfathering in devices prior to 1976.
Oh, right. The 510K process.
Yeah, the 510K process. And so I was like, whoa, holy moly, that's old.
Yeah. So what does that mean? I'll tell you, for anybody that's interested.
Yeah. And the 510K thing, and I'm in marketing, right? I've run a marketing agency for 23 years. And I'm kind of upset with the marketing industry as I was putting this episode together and as I've been watching these things, because you said it straight out in the documentary about how marketing will always win. Simply put, marketing always wins. And when I was consulting for a respiratory medical device company many, many years ago, I was in charge of a rebrand, and one of the people that was doing all of it, and I was part of the signature pages that would come in for all of these devices that were being rebranded. And here's me not knowing and not even being fully informed about what the 510K process even was about. I had never been in medical device. I was not jaded. I didn't have anything to go in with it. That's one of the reasons they hired me, was because I wasn't jaded. I didn't really know enough about what I was doing in relation to this outside of like the pretty branding and organization, project management, and all that stuff. But I did not know what they were hiring me to really do. And I found this out while I'm watching this documentary after talking with you. In my brain, I'm like, I was part of it without knowing it, but that's scary too. I was signing form after form after form for devices to be moved into the next thing. Is it just because it was rebranding? Not necessarily. We were bringing new products into the market too. So I'm just like, geez, Louise, man.
Yeah, that was an eye opener to me when I got into this area and I learned about 510K, because I always had the image that the FDA carefully studies every medical device that goes on the market. The fact is that the FDA doesn't require any real evaluation of safety or effectiveness for most medical devices. The 510K it's a regulation. It's Section 510K in the Code of Federal Regulation. That's lawyers. But what does it mean? It means you can get a medical device on the market with about a 3-page checkbox sheet. And if you can establish to the FDA that the product, and the buzzwords are substantially equivalent, is substantially equivalent to another medical device that's on the market, you can market it without having to go through pre-market approval. Pre-market approval is when you have to run clinical safety studies in multiple phases. You have to have all your labeling vetted by FDA people, and you have to have a very serious scrutiny of safety. 510K is not safety. It's substantially equivalent to another device which may not be safe, which may not even be on the market anymore, or which may have gotten on the market based on another product that's been recalled. And that's examples of things that have happened. So most of the medical devices that we encounter were only put on the market because they were substantially equivalent to something else that's in a long chain that goes way back years and years and years. And usually the root of that tree is something that, I won't say usually, but in many cases, the root of that tree is something that's either no longer on the market, was proven to be unsafe, was used differently, and really isn't a good comparator. But the companies love this because they can get to market quickly and cheaply. So they protect 510K like it's their golden goose. And in fact, with the pelvic mesh, there were some major meetings around 2011 to determine whether or not these devices should still be 510K. And the medical device industry sent in their good-looking, well-spoken representatives, and they went in and said 510K is great. There's no risks that we don't learn up front, and we know it all. And they told all sorts of stories, and they talked about why they need it. And the FDA, ultimately, some of the devices, they actually required safety studies for some of the devices because there was so much pressure on this now. There was so much public scrutiny because this litigation had gotten so big, and there were so many people pressing them. And what do you think the medical device companies did on the devices that they said you need to do a safety study? They withdrew almost every single one from the market. A couple of them actually tried to do the studies. And as far as I know, only 1 or 2 actually made it, where the FDA said, after years of studies, we're going to let you continue to use it. Because the company said, wait a second, we don't want to put this product through a safety study. It's going to be expensive, and it's probably not going to pass. So they just pulled them off the market.
I'm so grossed out. I'm like sick. I'm physically ill listening to you. Sorry. You're making me sick, man. I mean,
That's what everybody wants to hear is they can make people sick, right?
Thanks for being on the show. You made me want to barf. Been a pleasure. Nice knowing you, Adam.
It's a skill.
No, I'm just my brain is like going a million miles an hour right now because I'm thinking of all of these poor people, that I watched in that documentary, and I've watched a bunch of other medical documentaries as well. This one just happened to just pull on my heartstrings more than some others have. And I just think of all of these people that I know that are in my life that are in chronic pain because of just what you're talking about. And I'm so upset with our healthcare. I'm so angry. Like, I'm angry that there aren't people standing up for us more like you are. I mean, good God.
Well, it's avoidable. That's the biggest problem is it's not necessary. Like the procedures we're talking about, if we're going to talk, we're talking mostly about pelvic mesh today as a good example for this and a good focus point. There always were good procedures to treat the conditions that the mesh was brought in to treat. And those procedures are still used today. So you had these procedures just using sutures, regular surgery by a doctor.
Yeah.
And these mesh devices came along, and most of them are gone now. And guess what? Those suture procedures, regular surgery, they're still being done.
Yeah.
And why did the mesh come in? A big part of it was because the companies recognized that they could take hernia mesh and promote it as pelvic floor mesh because some doctors on their own were cutting little pieces of hernia mesh and sewing it in when they were doing repairs of women with certain conditions where they had weakness in their pelvic floor. That's a doctor making a decision and saying, okay, I'm going to do it this way. And they were trained in their residency and their fellowship. But the company said, well, if they're using a little hernia mesh like that, let's sell big sheets of hernia mesh, but let's rebrand it and rename it as gynemesh, pelvic floor mesh. It's hernia mesh. And let's sell it for the pelvic floor. And let's now have our consultants go and tell all the doctors at the meetings, hey, this is wonderful. A woman will never have the problem again. Now, as you talked about, well, what happens is the stuff gets cemented in by the scarring process and shrinks. And something that was really compelling that I took, as I always do, I take all my cases, I take all the evidence right out of their documents. There was this great PowerPoint from one of these companies. And the PowerPoint had a big picture of rebar. Anybody who knows what rebar is, if you see a building being built or a sidewalk being built, it's where you have these steel piping basically, and then the concrete gets dropped in and that helps to support the concrete. So this company was telling their sales reps, tell the doctors that this mesh is like rebar and then the body is going to cement it into place and it's going to be this great lasting repair. Well, I have taken that in my trials and we show this to the jury and my experts who are experienced in removing this stuff have testified and explained, well, yeah, it is like rebar. It's a great analogy because it does cement itself in, but then you think about it and say, all right, well, they were marketing as this great rebar. And again, maybe this is the stupidity of a lot of doctors, the lack of thought process by a lot of doctors who don't take the next step and think things through. Because if you have rebar and there's a pipe under there, a water main or something, I live in New Jersey. You go down the sidewalk here, you see people blasting away with jackhammers, whatever. They got to get to it. They blast away that concrete. They blast away the rebar. They get to where they have to go. And Con Ed or PSE&G or whoever fixes the wires. Then they put new rebar down and they jump in their concrete. Well, imagine what happens to the human body when you have to basically jackhammer down. And that's what they have to do. I've read operative reports where it's cemented to the pubic bone. It's so hard that they have to use complex electrocautery devices to burn away tissue. They're cutting in because this isn't a sidewalk. This is a woman's body. So the damage that's left, often a woman can be left even worse off than she was before. But man, there's a great decision to have to make. You're a woman who at 45 years old had some leaking urine that would bother you once in a while. And so you'd have to wear pads or something. And now a doctor says, we got this great mesh thing and it's going to save you and you're never going to leak again. And then they put that in there. And now they have all this pain and they can't have sex anymore because it hurts too much. And they've got eroding mesh and they have all this scarring. So the doctor says, well, you can live with the pain for the rest of your life, or we can do surgery to remove it. But one of the risks is you're going to be even worse off. That's the choice that the women have. And so many have opted for the removal of the mesh. And in some cases, the mesh gets out and the patient feels a little better. But in a lot of these cases, because of the nerve damage and the cutting and all the scarring that gets accumulated, now you're worse. But you had a catch-22. It's a terrible decision to make. And there's women making that decision every single day. There's women making that decision today. And again, this translates to other contexts, but it's really been maddening in the pelvic mesh area because they would pretend that this was so safe, and the warnings were completely inadequate. And it's devastating for so many women to have to deal with that choice and to have a life of pain. And I talk to them every day. My heart bleeds. It's terrible. And again, it just wasn't necessary. We didn't need some marketers to come up with a good marketing plan to say, well, we'll create a market for a surgery nobody needs. But that's
I'm just flabbergasted. If you guys saw me, my mouth has been open like a guppy fish, just like jaw dropped over here. Well, like I've said, this just angers me. And what can we do, outside of, like you mentioned, all of these brave women that are coming forth and sharing their stories and telling them about it? It gets in the way. They've got issues that they're dealing with, not just chronic pain for the rest of their lives. You're talking about your intimacy, your relationships. You feel guilt, you feel shame. Your relationships are broken down and
marriages
dead.
are falling apart. Marriages are falling apart all over the place.
Yeah, that you're messing with our sex life, like right out of the gates. Let's start there, on top of the chronic pain that comes from that, and children that have been born. And when you give birth, sometimes, some of these issues arise, right? I haven't given birth, but every time I sneeze, I pee a little.
Thank you for that information.
You're welcome. I'm open and honest here on this show, but it's true. And so the kids feel like it's their fault. It goes on and on and on. And I just feel so horrible for these families that are affected by this.
And let me say one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about marriages falling apart and lives being broken. One of the things that I've learned also is there's really remarkable people with strength that I don't know where people get the strength from. And there's a ton of men that have stood by the woman that they're with and have said, this is my bride. This is my wife. This is my partner. This is who I'm going to be with. And you know what? We'll find other ways to love each other. It sucks. Being able to have intercourse is a pretty important part of a lasting long-term relationship for most people. Yeah. And it sucks that that's been taken from me. But there's a lot of men who have stood by their wives, and so you see amazing things. And the women that have testified in these cases, because I've tried a bunch of them, man. I don't know if I could do that to stand up there and stand in a courtroom with a bunch of strangers and talk about your vagina and talk about your sex life and talk about urine loss and all these things. But man, and it's scary for them.
Totally. I'm scared for them just sitting here thinking about it.
But they suck it up and they say, you know what? I was wronged. And, the way that these cases are defended, and this is more of a generality in all types of litigation where you're representing someone who's been harmed by someone else. Defense number one is blame the victim. Blame the victim for existing. Blame the victim for having a medical condition that needed to be treated. Blame the victim for having a complication. Blame the victim for how they made a decision. Blame the victim for everything. But it's great to see women who say, you're not going to blame me. I did exactly what you wanted me to do. I said yes to a doctor who told me exactly what you wanted him or her to tell me. And I say the him or her part because there's a lot of women who are doctors who put this stuff into the women's bodies, and they were as oblivious or more so than male doctors. There's no generality. It's not a question of male doctors are victimizing women, and there's all these female doctors out there protecting them. Some of the worst offenders that I've come across, some of the key experts for these companies in these trials who I've cross-examined at trial are women. And I look at them and I say to myself, how can you get up there and say that? How can you stand up there and say you got into female urogynecology because you really wanted to help women, and then you are part of the problem and you're sitting here defending it and blaming this poor woman who was victimized by it and trying to come up with all sorts of lies about what's happening to her, as opposed to the obvious, which is this device is ruining her life. It's unfortunate. That's the system we have. But fortunately, we can put in the evidence that we can too. And that's why it's difficult. These cases are difficult because there's a lot of money on the other side and there's a lot of resources on the defense side for these companies. But women do stand up to them and they do testify and they talk about these intimate parts of their lives. And, I've had tears going down my face while I've questioned some of my clients. And I know I'm kind of filibustering a little, but I'm getting memories. I tried a case in Missouri back in 2015, and it was a heart-wrenching case. And the woman who had been victimized had mesh put in her body. that never should have been put in. She had barely any prolapse of her organs. That's the indication. Your bladder or your rectum starts to drop down into your vagina. She had almost nothing. This stupid doctor out in Missouri put this stuff into this woman's body. It became infected. The infection went to her lungs. She had a systemic sepsis. She died. So she wasn't even there to speak for herself. And her husband, who was 91 years old at the time, while he was testifying, they met when I think they were either just out of high school or he was just out of the service. I mean, young kids. This guy was a fighter bomber pilot in World War II. This guy was America. I mean, you talk about what our country's supposed to be. It was him. And he was talking about his bride and how they met and the life they had together. And I've had this in a few of my trials, by the way. I could also talk about another couple from North Carolina, another couple from New Jersey. I mean, I could feel I've been through this a lot of times, and I had tears running down my face while he was talking about what she went through and what she lost. And, you know, he was with her obviously till the end, and it was heart-wrenching. But that's a whole different topic, is the drama and the pain of human beings that go through this process, but then have the courage to go to trial against a giant corporation with unlimited resources. But people, man, they do it. They do it. I mean, I just go in there and I do the best I can for them. They've got the hard job. They have to put their life on the line.
Well, you're doing amazing stuff for us women out there. And it's one of the reasons why I fell in love with you pretty quickly, because you can just tell how passionate you are about it and how pissed off you are about it. He's been banging on his desk, just so you guys know, if that's the noise that you are hearing. Just letting him keep banging, buddy. But, you know, I feel like we all just get thrown in, us women get thrown into this whole, like, we're just emotional. We're just making things up. It's not, who cares about if it's ruining your life, your relationship, you're living in pain, you're crying in the shower all night. It's just, I feel like we're just all thrown into just a backpack of like anything that they think that we may or may not have. Kind of like what we were talking about fibromyalgia. Like, well, we haven't been able to figure out what's wrong with you. So guess what? You have fibro.
Well, you know, one of the things I also saw is I'm a guy. Men have issues once in a while. Nobody's saying, well, you will do this procedure on you, we'll do that procedure on you. It's all right. Well, you know what? Do this or do that. Lifestyle, take care of yourself, eat better, whatever. What I started to learn when I looked at women's gynecologic medical records is the surgical and medical histories, all the procedures that get pushed on them.
Yeah.
On you, on women. And you know, the doctors are oblivious, but this is what they're thinking. It's almost like a woman's body is something to be operated on, to be experimented on, to be a source of money, because every procedure generates money. And I think until the medical profession takes a step back and acknowledges where this has gone, I don't know if the problem is going to really end. You're going to need more advocates. I mean, I got contacted by some women in Scotland, and I'm going to tell a name, Marion Scott, at the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Marion is a unbelievably remarkable woman. She came to me and said, you know, these women in Scotland with these mesh problems, I don't know what the hell's going on, but they're pissed and they want some justice because they're hurt and they're being ignored. And I sent her some documents that had been used at trial, and she did some stories on it. And these women went to the Scottish Parliament and they didn't take no for an answer. And I actually had the honor of testifying to the Scottish Parliament subcommittee about these devices. And these women, they got these devices pulled off the market in Scotland.
That's so awesome.
Banned pelvic mesh. And then it happened in the UK. And so it shows you that grassroots campaigns on this kind of thing can work, but it wasn't easy. And they lucked out on certain things, and they got the information I was able to send them. But you know, so that gave the inside story to these people. I mean, you should have seen these people in the Scottish Parliament looking at these documents I was talking about, and you could see their faces like, is this real?
Yeah, that's what my face is. This whole episode, I've just been kind of like, and I know this stuff to be true, but when you're hearing it from your mouth to my ears and our ears as we're listening to you speak about this, we have to keep using our voices, and we have to do the grassroots stuff like you've talked about. And it's actually a little bit of the reason why I'm doing this podcast too, is to help generate any kind of help that I can for any women, any men, anybody that's out there that has been harmed from trauma and any of these kinds of things that we've been talking about, because it's kind of like my life's work now. And finding people like you are, you're hard to find. And the way I found you is just so cool.
Well, it's cool.
Even though it came from a bad, icky situation, it's kind of cool how
it's
I
cool for
found
me
you.
to meet you too. I mean, I'm because I'm always really, really amazed by people who will take a stand and who will devote themselves, not to do it just once, but to do it as a process and to invest real time and real effort and put their ass on the line. You know, you said so many things that have resonated with me because things are just flying through my head. Like you mentioned fibromyalgia. It comes back to, you were talking about how do you protect yourself? You're allowed to call bullshit on a doctor.
Right.
You're allowed to say to a doctor, well, why are you telling me I have fibromyalgia? How'd you diagnose that? Because I'll tell you about fibromyalgia. A lot of women have been diagnosed with it. This pain, you have diffuse pain across your body. In every single case where that's been a diagnosis, I'm able to ask the experts for the defendants. Nobody ever actually did the rigorous diagnostic criteria to actually prove the person actually had what is described as fibromyalgia in the medical literature. No, nobody ever did that. Boom, out. Because it's a garbage diagnosis. She has pain. She's complaining about pain. I'll call it fibromyalgia.
Yeah. We'll put you on gabapentin or Lamictal or whatever.
You got some bladder pain, some bladder discomfort. We'll call it interstitial cystitis. I know I'm sounding wonky with these terms, and I'm showing off that I can pronounce some medical terms. But
you big show off.
That's a garbage diagnosis. I can't diagnose what it is, so we're just going to label this with it. But how about maybe somebody just has some discomfort because of they're eating something that's not really agreeing with themselves. Maybe they just need a more holistic approach to what they're putting in their body. There's so many different ways to approach this.
Yep.
And it's just, I don't think that medicine and devices are always the right first step, but unfortunately, doctors have been trained from the time they're in residency by their attendings that this is where you get information. This is where you learn to do things. You go to society meetings, you listen to sales representatives, and you read articles often written by people who are being paid by the companies without disclosure.
Of course they are.
That's, again, another whole area we could talk about.
Yeah.
In this mesh litigation, I took the deposition of the editor-in-chief and the executive editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, supposed to be the preeminent medical journal in the world,
right,
about an article written about one of these devices. When that deposition was over, it had been made clear that the study they were sent had been rewritten multiple times by people inside Johnson & Johnson, and that was never disclosed, and that a bunch of data wasn't provided to them, and that if you looked at the data carefully, you realize the study actually didn't stand for what it said it stood for, and that study has never been used in another trial after that deposition. And that's the preeminent medical journal in the world published an article, and it turned out that the article was very misleading. So it's scary, but at least get a second opinion. Talk to someone else. Use your common sense. And if you don't have a life-threatening condition, try to find another way to deal with it rather than putting something permanently in your body if you can avoid it. I mean, it's easy for me to say that as a generality, but I think that those rules would save some people from problems they don't have to have otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to kind of close out the episode too, about, because I always like to what would you like to leave our listeners with, And it really is about being our own advocates and sticking up for ourselves and sticking up for those women and men in our lives that also have had things happen to them. Don't push them away, love up on them, because I promise you, I'm not making this up, And all of this has just been so eye-opening.
Hey, what else can you do? This happens to be a pretty political time in our lives right now. Politics has become a sport. It's something we all watch, like we used to watch movies. Now we watch politics. Hey, there's nothing wrong with putting pressure on your Congress people and your senators and writing letters to them and saying, I'm outraged. I'm outraged by the medical device industry. I'm outraged what I'm hearing. I want you to do investigations into them. I want you to put in rules that require real clinical studies, real objective clinical studies that are refereed by doctors who don't have any money to be made off the product and who are really objective. And there's so many different things that can be done. Give some teeth to the FDA. Don't let FDA employees leave and go to work for the medical device manufacturers the next day. That's, again, a whole other area of problem. I'd love to say the FDA is there to protect us, and it says that in the papers, but they don't have the money. They don't have the resources. They're in bed with these companies that they work with every day. And a tremendous number of people at the FDA are looking to go to work for big pharma because that's where they can make a lot more money. And they can then say, well, I've got all these friends at the FDA, so when we need to massage something through, I can call Joe up. I can call Betty up. Don't worry, I can work it out for you. A lot of people leave the FDA and go to industry, or they go back and forth.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways the system could be modified. And so I say to people, if you're worried about this and you're outraged by it, tell your congressperson, put some pressure on, create a grassroots campaign around the country, speak up. There's no other way to change things, and it can work. It worked in Scotland.
Yeah. Oh, Scotland, you've just bring your rules over here, would you? I would like a much better healthcare system. That is for sure. And after listening to all of this today, I'm just like, I have so little faith in doctors these days. And this is, again, not to just like to piggyback on what you said, is this isn't a blanket statement about every doctor on the planet, but I'll tell you, there's more doctors that are out there that I've had to deal with that are in this bucket of not caring about my body and what's going to happen to it if A, B, and C happens, than there are in my wheelhouse, where they're just loving and ask all of the right questions and care and spend longer than 22 seconds with you.
Or just legitimately don't have the time or the bandwidth to do the job they want to do because they're forced to fill out paperwork for the health insurance companies all day long to justify treatments that are needed.
Yeah, that are needed, not needed. It's like, so.
And having to document everything. I mean, I know plenty of doctors who really want to do a good job, and all they talk about is how frustrated they are that because of all the paperwork they have to do, they probably should have just become a word processing person. Whatever that is, a word processing.
Whatever that is, a word processing person. Oh my God, Adam. Okay, well, with that, we've got some work to do, ladies and gentlemen, and I think we can start working on it together. I do encourage you to watch this documentary, The Bleeding Edge, with my pal Adam here. He just turned into my pal overnight, so it's not like we've known each other for a long time. And we're pals, we're buddies. Remember we. It has just been wonderful having you on, eye-opening as like I can possibly. Gosh, I want to talk to you for like 5 more hours, but we are officially out of time. So, okay, guys, so you get out there, grassroots, like Mr. and Mrs. Grassroots, let's get moving, because I think that, we still need to keep using our voices. And we've seen that with prior administration, where we did get out there and we did do there were a lot of pink pussy hats walking around. This is the power of it, right? This is what we say. And us women, we get through a lot more than men. I swear sometimes, like my sweetie does have that. He does like to say, I don't know how you do it and power through the chronic pain that I do. And I'm doing it for just this reason. So to have my voice be heard and to help others' voices be heard. So I want to thank you for spending time with me today. It's been awesome.
Thanks, Lyndsay. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk to you. And I hope that maybe it's a little bit of good out there. Maybe we move things in a little better direction.
Hey, if we tick it the right direction, then we're doing the right thing. You are exclusively invited to share this meshy VIP pain journey together. Let's get to the heart of how to heal with you by my side. Please follow the Pain Game podcast wherever you digest your podcast content. We will be there. And don't forget to give the show a review or two as well. Visit us at thepaingamepodcast.com. Follow us on all the socials. Thanks for listening, my little VIPs. Catch you on the other side.